The ballroom of Cranston House blazed with 1,000 candles, their light fracturing through crystal chandeliers and scattering diamonds across the sea of silk and satin below. Phoebe moved through the glittering assembly like a shadow, invisible by design and necessity. Her gray maid's livery marked her as furniture, something to be used but never acknowledged. She carried a silver tray of champagne flutes, her posture perfect, her expression carefully blank. The Countess Montrose did not tolerate imperfection. More importantly, she did not tolerate visibility. Phoebe had learned this lesson thoroughly during her 3 years of service. Keep your eyes down. Keep your hands steady. Keep your thoughts to yourself. The small leather purse hidden beneath the loose floorboard in her attic room held £19, 6 shillings and threepence, every penny she had managed to save from her meager wages. In 2 more years, perhaps 3, she would have enough to leave London entirely. A small cottage somewhere quiet, a garden, a life where she answered to no one but herself. The fantasy sustained her through the Countess's casual cruelties and the endless grinding labor. It sustained her now as she wove between clusters of aristocrats who spoke over her head as though she were made of air. "The season has been dreadfully dull," Lady Clarissa Baines announced to her circle of admirers, her voice pitched to carry. She was a vision in emerald silk, her blonde curls artfully arranged, her beauty as sharp and deliberate as a blade. "I do hope the Duke decides to make an appearance, though I suspect even Gideon Shaw would find this assembly beneath him." Laughter rippled through her audience. Phoebe moved past them toward the servants' corridor, her tray now empty. She had nearly reached the doorway when she heard it, a sound that didn't belong among the orchestral music and polite conversation. A whimper, high and desperate. "My lovely family, before we continue with Phoebe and Gideon's story, let me ask you something. How many times have you watched a beautiful love story on this channel without hitting that subscribe button? These stories take days to craft, yet only few of you who watch regularly are actually subscribed. If you've ever felt your heart flutter during one of these tales, isn't it worth one small click? Subscribe now, because I pour my soul into these stories, and your support is what keeps them coming. Don't be the person who takes without giving back." Phoebe paused, her training warring with instinct. She should ignore it. She should return to the kitchens, refill her tray, and continue her invisible circuit. But the sound came again, accompanied now by cruel laughter from somewhere near the garden doors. Her feet carried her forward before her mind could object. The cluster of young gentlemen stood near the marble columns that framed the entrance to the terrace. They were all flushed with wine and boredom, their expensive coats slightly disheveled. In the center of their circle, cornered against the wall, was a puppy. It was small and pathetically thin, its coat a dirty white that spoke of neglect. One of the gentlemen, the Honorable Thomas Ashford, Phoebe recognized with a sinking heart, held a walking stick, using it to prod the terrified animal whenever it tried to escape. "Look how it jumps," Ashford said with a laugh, "like a trained circus performer." "Give it here," another said. "I want to see if it can swim." There's a fountain just outside. Phoebe didn't remember making the decision. She simply moved, her body acting on an instinct deeper than self-preservation. She pushed through the circle of gentlemen, ignoring their startled protests, and scooped the trembling puppy into her arms. The creature was all bone and fear, its heart hammering against her palm. It looked up at her with eyes too large for its small face, and something in Phoebe's chest cracked open. "I beg your pardon," she said quietly, forcing herself to meet Ashford's outraged stare. "This animal needs care, not torment." The music seemed to falter. Conversations died in expanding ripples as heads turned toward the unprecedented sight of a maid speaking. Not just speaking, but challenging her betters. "How dare you?" Ashford sputtered. "That's my property. I found it in the street. Then you won't miss it." Phoebe turned to leave, the puppy clutched against her chest. She made it exactly 3 steps before Lady Clarissa's voice cut through the silence like a whip crack. "Good heavens! Look what the creature has done to the floor." Every eye in the ballroom dropped to the marble where Phoebe stood. A trail of muddy paw prints marked her path from the garden doors, each one a damning piece of evidence against her. The puppy had left marks across her gray dress as well, dark stains that stood out like accusations. "The maid has brought filth into Cranston House," Clarissa continued, her voice dripping with theatrical horror. "During the Countess's ball, no less. I have never witnessed such appalling presumption." The crowd parted, revealing the Countess Montrose herself. She was a handsome woman in her 50s, her beauty preserved through expensive creams and an absolute absence of warmth. Her expression as she surveyed Phoebe was one of cold fury. "You dare," the Countess said softly. "You dare to make a spectacle of yourself in front of my guests?" "Madam, I only meant to—" "Silence." The word cracked like a gunshot. "You have embarrassed me beyond measure. You have embarrassed yourself, though I suspect you lack the breeding to understand the full extent of your transgression." Laughter bubbled up around them, not the polite titters of society amusement, but genuine mockery. Phoebe felt her cheeks burn, her fingers tightening protectively around the puppy. "Look at her," someone whispered loudly. "Filthy as the mongrel she's clutching." The presumption of servants these days. She actually thought she could? "Enough," the Countess declared. "You are dismissed, immediately. Pack your belongings and leave my house before sunrise. You will receive no references, and if I hear of you seeking employment in any respectable household in London, I will ensure every door remains closed to you." The words landed like blows. No references meant no position. No position meant no wages. £19, 6 shillings, and threepence would last perhaps 3 months if she was extraordinarily careful. After that, Phoebe raised her chin, refusing to let them see her fear. "Yes, madam." She turned toward the servants' entrance, each step an agony of humiliation. The whispers and laughter followed her like hounds. She was nearly to the doorway when the butler's voice rang out, formal and grave. "His Grace, the Duke of Shaw." The announcement shattered the moment. Every head turned toward the main entrance as the crowd parted once more. And there, framed in the doorway like a figure from a darker, more dangerous world, stood Duke Gideon Shaw. His eyes, cold and gray as winter steel, swept across the ballroom and fixed directly on Phoebe. Gideon Shaw had attended the Countess's ball with the resignation of a man fulfilling an unavoidable obligation. His late mother's closest friend had requested his presence, and despite his preference for solitude, some debts transcended personal comfort. He had arrived late deliberately, hoping to make a brief appearance before retreating to the blessed quiet of his own library. He had not expected to walk into a public execution. The scene had registered in fragments as he stood in the doorway. A young woman in maid's livery, her dark hair escaping its pins, clutching something small and white against her chest. The Countess Montrose, her face arranged in that particular expression of aristocratic outrage that Gideon had learned to despise during his 32 years navigating society. And surrounding them both, a crowd of glittering parasites feeding on humiliation like wine. He had heard the Countess's dismissal, each word calculated to destroy. He had seen the maid's chin lift in defiance even as her hands trembled. And he had felt something he had not experienced in years, a flicker of genuine interest in another human being. The butler's announcement of his arrival had created the expected disruption. Conversations faltered. Postures straightened. Lady Clarissa Baines turned toward him with a practiced smile that didn't reach her calculating eyes. She had been pursuing him with increasing aggression for 2 seasons now, mistaking his indifference for a challenge to be overcome. Gideon ignored her entirely. He walked forward, his boots clicking against the marble with measured precision. The crowd parted instinctively, responding to something in his bearing that had nothing to do with his title and everything to do with the stark authority he carried like a second skin. He had learned long ago that true power required no announcement. It simply was. The maid had frozen halfway to the servant's entrance. She stood perfectly still, the small white puppy. For that's what the creature was, he could see now, pressed against her stained dress. Her eyes were remarkable, wide and dark and utterly fearless despite the disaster unfolding around her. "Your Grace," the Countess said, recovering quickly and sweeping into a curtsy. "What an unexpected pleasure. I apologize for the unseemly disturbance. A servant who has forgotten her place, nothing more. The matter is being handled." Gideon stopped directly in front of the maid. She was tall for a woman, which meant she didn't have to crane her neck quite as much as most people did to meet his eyes. Up close, he could see the rapid pulse at her throat, the white-knuckled grip she maintained on the puppy. But her gaze remained steady. "Your name," he said quietly. She blinked. "I beg your pardon, Your Grace?" "Your name," he repeated, his tone unchanged. "What are you called?" "Phoebe, Your Grace. Phoebe Hartley." The surrounding whispers intensified. The Duke of Shaw did not speak to servants. He barely spoke to anyone. His reputation for cold reserve was legendary, a wall of ice that had frozen out every attempt at intimacy or manipulation for over a decade. Gideon studied her for another moment, cataloging details. The intelligent eyes, the careful posture that spoke of pride despite her circumstances, the way she held the injured animal as though its life mattered more than her own future. He had spent years learning to read people, to identify the charlatans and opportunists who populated his world. This woman was neither. She was something far more dangerous and infinitely more rare. She was genuine. "Miss Hartley," he said, loud enough for the entire ballroom to hear, "would you do me the honor of allowing me to examine the animal you have rescued?" The question landed like a stone in still water. Confusion rippled outward. The Countess made a small, strangled sound. Phoebe hesitated, then carefully shifted the puppy so Gideon could see it properly. The creature was in poor condition, malnourished, filthy, with what appeared to be an injured front paw. Its coat was white beneath the grime, its eyes wide with terror. "The gentlemen were entertaining themselves," Phoebe said carefully, "at the animal's expense." Gideon's gaze shifted briefly to Thomas Ashford, who had gone pale. The young fool actually took a step backward, as though distance might protect him from the Duke's attention. "I see," Gideon said. He looked back at Phoebe. "And you intervened despite knowing the consequences?" It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. "Yes, Your Grace. Because you believed it was right. Because it was necessary." The distinction pleased him more than it should have. He extended his hand toward her, not to take the puppy, but to her directly, palm up. An invitation, not a command. The ballroom seemed to hold its collective breath. Phoebe stared at his outstretched hand as though it were a serpent. He could see her mind working, weighing possibilities and dangers. She understood the significance of the gesture, even if she couldn't comprehend his motivation. If she took his hand, everything would change. "Miss Hartley," he said quietly, for her ears alone, "you have two choices. You can leave this house tonight with nothing but your courage and a starving puppy, or you can trust that I recognize value when I see it." Something flickered in her eyes, hope, perhaps, or simply the desperate calculation of someone with no good options. She shifted the puppy to one arm and placed her free hand in his. Her palm was rough with work, her fingers cold. Gideon closed his hand around hers and turned to face the assembly. The room had gone so quiet he could hear the candles guttering in their sconces. "The Countess has graciously released Miss Hartley from her current position," he announced, his voice carrying effortlessly across the space. "I am therefore pleased to offer her employment as head housekeeper of Heathmore, my estate in Derbyshire. She will assume her duties immediately." The explosion of whispers was instantaneous. The Countess's face had gone white, then red. Lady Clarissa looked as though she had been slapped. But no one dared speak. No one dared question. Because Gideon Shaw, Duke of Shaw, had made his position clear in the only way society understood, through public, irrevocable action. He felt Phoebe's hand tremble in his grasp. When he looked down at her, he saw shock and disbelief warring with something that might have been gratitude. "Your Grace," she whispered, "I don't understand." "You will," he said. "Collect your belongings. My carriage will convey you to my London residence tonight. We depart for Heathmore in the morning." He released her hand, the absence of contact strangely notable. Then he turned and walked back toward the entrance, knowing without looking that the crowd would part for him exactly as it had before. Behind him, he heard the Countess beginning some kind of protest. He didn't pause. Whatever she had to say was irrelevant. He had made his choice, and Gideon Shaw never reconsidered. As he reached the doorway, he allowed himself the smallest of smiles. For the first time in years, he was curious about tomorrow. The Duke's London residence was nothing like Phoebe had imagined. She had expected grandeur, certainly, gilt and marble, and ostentatious displays of wealth. Instead, Shaw House was austere to the point of severity. Dark wood paneling, minimal ornamentation, furniture chosen for function rather than fashion. It was the home of a man who had no interest in impressing anyone. She had spent the night in a guest room that was larger than the entire attic she had shared with two other maids at the Countess's house. The bed was almost aggressively comfortable, the linens crisp and clean. The puppy, she had taken to calling him Ghost for his pale coat and silent movements, had slept curled against her side, his small body finally warm and fed, thanks to the kitchen staff's surprising kindness. Sleep had been impossible. Every time Phoebe closed her eyes, she saw the Duke's outstretched hand, felt the shocking warmth of his palm against hers. The entire evening had the quality of a fever dream. Surely she would wake to find herself still in the Countess's attic, the ball and the rescue and the impossible intervention nothing more than wishful fantasy. But morning had come, gray and real, and a maid had arrived with breakfast and the message that His Grace requested her presence in his study at 10 o'clock precisely. Now Phoebe stood outside the heavy oak door, Ghost tucked securely in the crook of her arm, trying to calm the frantic beating of her heart. She wore the same gray dress from last night, brushed clean as best she could manage. It was her only dress apart from her nightgown. Everything she owned fit into a single canvas bag. She knocked. "Enter?" The study was exactly what she should have expected. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a massive desk of dark walnut, windows that looked out onto a small, immaculately maintained garden. The Duke sat behind the desk, his attention focused on a document before him. He was dressed simply in dark trousers and a white shirt, no cravat. His coat draped over the back of his chair. It was shockingly informal for a duke, and somehow more intimidating than full aristocratic regalia. He glanced up as she entered, his gray eyes assessing. "Miss Hartley, please sit." Phoebe lowered herself into the chair across from him, acutely aware of how out of place she must look. Ghost shifted in her arms, and the Duke's gaze dropped to the puppy. "How is the animal?" "Better, Your Grace. The cook gave me some meat scraps and warm milk. His paw is injured, but I don't believe it's broken." "Good." He set down his pen with precise care. "We should discuss the terms of your employment." Of course. This was a business arrangement, nothing more. The romantic notion that had flickered to life in some foolish corner of Phoebe's mind died a quiet death. The Duke hadn't rescued her out of sentiment. He had seen an opportunity, perhaps. A capable servant in need of a position. "Yes, Your Grace." "Heathmore has been without proper management for 3 years," he said, his tone businesslike. "My previous housekeeper retired, and I have been unable to find a suitable replacement. The estate is remote. The nearest village is 4 miles distant, the nearest town of any significance nearly 15. The house itself is in need of significant repair. The staff is small, and I suspect has grown lax in the absence of firm leadership." He paused, studying her. "I require someone capable of restoring order and efficiency, someone who can manage accounts, oversee repairs, and command respect from the existing staff. In short, Miss Hartley, I require someone competent and unafraid of hard work." "I am both those things, Your Grace." "I know." There was something in the way he said it, a certainty that suggested he had already catalogued her qualities and found them sufficient. "However, I must be absolutely clear about the nature of this arrangement. You will be my head housekeeper. You will be well compensated, £50 per annum, plus room, board, and a clothing allowance appropriate to your position. You will have complete authority over the household staff and domestic operations." £50. Phoebe's breath caught. It was more than double what she had earned as a maid. It was a fortune. "That is extraordinarily generous, Your Grace. It is fair compensation for the work I expect." He leaned back in his chair, his expression unchanged. "But you must understand what this position is and what it is not. You will be my employee, Miss Hartley. Nothing more. There will be no expectations of a personal nature, no romantic entanglement, no social elevation beyond what the role of housekeeper naturally provides." The bluntness of it stung more than Phoebe wanted to admit. She forced herself to meet his eyes. "I would never presume. I am not accusing you of presumption. I am establishing boundaries." His voice remained level, almost clinical. "Last night's intervention has likely generated considerable gossip. There will be speculation about my motives and your character. I want you to understand that I am offering you employment, not salvation, not courtship. The relationship between us will be strictly professional." "I understand perfectly, Your Grace." "Do you?" He tilted his head slightly, and for the first time she saw something other than cold assessment in his expression. Curiosity, perhaps. "I am not a romantic figure from a novel, Miss Hartley. I am a man who values order, efficiency, and solitude. I spend the majority of my time at Heathmore specifically because it is remote and I am left alone. I have no interest in marriage, no desire for companionship, and no patience for emotional complications." The words should have been reassuring. Instead, they settled over Phoebe like a shroud. She had known, of course, that the Duke's intervention was not personal. Men like him did not fall in love with maids, no matter what foolish novels suggested. But hearing it stated so baldly, with such absolute finality, drove the lesson home. "Then we are well matched, Your Grace," she said quietly. "I have no interest in romance either. I want security, independence, a position where my work is valued and compensated fairly. That is all." Something flickered in his eyes. Approval, she thought. Excellent. Then we understand each other. He pulled a document from his desk drawer and slid it across to her. "This is a contract detailing the terms of your employment. Read it carefully. If you find the conditions acceptable, sign at the bottom. We leave for Heathmore tomorrow morning at 8. Phoebe took the document. Scanning the neat script, it was all there, exactly as he had described. Duties, compensation, terms of dismissal. Everything reduced to ink and paper, clean and uncomplicated. She signed. Gideon took the contract back, countersigned it with swift efficiency, and handed her a copy. "Welcome to Heathmore, Miss Hartley." "Thank you, Your Grace." She stood, ghost warm against her chest. "One more thing." He rose as well, his height forcing her to look up. "The puppy. You intend to keep it?" "If it's permitted, Your Grace. I'll ensure he doesn't interfere with my duties." The Duke studied Ghost for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, unexpectedly, he reached out and scratched the puppy behind one torn ear. Ghost's tail gave a tentative wag. "See that you do," Gideon said. He withdrew his hand and returned his attention to his papers. "That will be all, Miss Hartley." Phoebe left the study, contract in hand, heart carefully armored. She had her security, her independence, a generous salary, and a position of authority. It was everything she had wanted. She told herself it was enough. The journey to Heathmore took 2 days, and with each mile that passed, London's noise and crowds fell away like shed skin. Phoebe traveled in the Duke's second carriage. He had ridden ahead on horseback shortly after dawn on the first day, with Ghost curled contentedly on the seat beside her, and a landscape that grew progressively wilder outside the window. The cities gave way to towns, the towns to villages, the villages to nothing but rolling moorland and distant peaks. The sky seemed larger here, pressing down with a weight that was both oppressive and oddly liberating. There were no people to judge, no society to navigate. Just earth and stone and the occasional farmhouse huddled against the wind. By the second afternoon, when the carriage finally turned onto a narrow, rutted drive, Phoebe understood why the Duke had chosen this place for his self-imposed exile. Heathmore wasn't just remote. It was defiantly isolated, as though the estate had turned its back on the world and dared it to follow. The house emerged from the landscape like something from a Gothic tale. It was built of gray stone that matched the surrounding moors, sprawling and asymmetrical, clearly the product of several centuries of additions and modifications. One wing showed obvious signs of neglect, windows dark, ivy creeping unchecked across the walls. The grounds that should have been gardens were overgrown. The drive pitted with holes that made the carriage lurch and sway. It was, Phoebe thought with a surge of unexpected excitement, an absolute disaster. And it was hers to fix. The carriage rolled to a stop before the main entrance, where a small assembly of servants had gathered. Phoebe counted. Quickly, 2 footmen, a butler who looked nearly as old as the house itself, 3 maids of varying ages, and a cook whose stained apron suggested she had been pulled directly from her kitchen. 8 people to manage an estate this size. No wonder it had fallen into disrepair. The Duke stood slightly apart from the group, still in his riding clothes, his expression as remote as the landscape. He didn't move to help her from the carriage. One of the footmen performed that service. But his eyes tracked her descent, cataloging her reaction to her new home. Phoebe stepped down, Ghost secure in her arms, and surveyed the assembled staff. They stared back with expressions ranging from curiosity to suspicion. She was younger than they had expected. She could see that calculation happening. Younger and common-born, and entirely too associated with the Duke for comfort. "Miss Hartley," the butler said, his voice reedy with age. "Welcome to Heathmore. I am Brennan. I have served His Grace's family for 43 years. There was challenge in the statement, a claim of territory and authority. Phoebe met his gaze steadily. "Mr. Brennan, I look forward to working with you. His Grace has spoken of the loyalty of Heathmore's staff." The Duke had said no such thing, but the lie served its purpose. Brennan's shoulders straightened slightly, and the suspicion in his eyes softened to cautious approval. "Perhaps," the Duke said, his voice cutting through the moment. "Mr. Brennan could show Miss Hartley to her rooms. I'm sure she would like to refresh herself before dinner." It was a dismissal, politely phrased, but absolute. The Duke turned and walked into the house without waiting for a response, his boots echoing on stone. The staff scattered to their duties with the practiced efficiency of people accustomed to their master's abrupt departures. Phoebe followed Brennan through a massive oak door and into an entrance hall that should have been impressive, but instead felt melancholy. The floors were clean enough, but the corners held dust. The portraits on the walls were dimmed by years of smoke and neglect. A chandelier hung dark and cobwebbed overhead. "The house has 63 rooms," Brennan said as he led her down a corridor, "though only the west wing and parts of the main house are currently in use. The east wing was closed 15 years ago after the old Duke passed. Too expensive to heat and maintain." "And the staff?" "What you saw is what we have, miss. His Grace is not one for entertaining, and he spends most of his time in the library or writing the estate. We manage well enough for his needs." They climbed a staircase to the second floor, where Brennan stopped before a door near the middle of the corridor. "Your rooms, Miss Hartley. They belong to the previous housekeeper, Mrs. Cavendish. I trust you'll find them adequate." The sitting room was spacious and bright, with windows overlooking the wild gardens. Beyond it, a bedroom held a substantial bed and wardrobe. Both rooms were clean but sparse, decorated with the practical simplicity of someone who had no interest in frippery. Phoebe set Ghost down, and the puppy immediately began exploring, his claws clicking on the wooden floors. "Dinner is served at 7, Brennan said. "His Grace takes his meals in the small dining room when he's alone. You'll be expected to dine in your rooms unless specifically summoned." "Of course." The separation was clear. She was an employee, not a companion. "Mr. Brennan, I'd like to begin reviewing the household accounts tomorrow morning, and I'll need a complete tour of the estate, every room, every outbuilding. I want to understand exactly what we're working with." Something that might have been respect flickered in the old butler's eyes. "I'll make the arrangements, miss." After he left, Phoebe moved to the window and looked out over the estate. The moors stretched endlessly, brown and gray under a sky-threatening rain. Somewhere in that wilderness, she knew the Duke was probably riding, putting distance between himself and human contact. The challenge before her was immense. The house needed not just cleaning, but restoration. The staff needed leadership and probably expansion. The accounts would likely be a shambles. It would take months, perhaps years, to bring Heathmore back to proper order. Ghost padded over and sat on her foot, looking up with trusting eyes. "Well," Phoebe said quietly, reaching down to scratch his ears, We wanted independence. We wanted work that mattered. It appears we've gotten both. That night, she dined alone in her sitting room on surprisingly good food delivered by one of the maids. Through the window, she could see a single light burning in what Brennan had identified as the Duke's library. He was there now, she knew, alone with his books and his carefully maintained isolation. She thought of his words in the study. No expectations of romance, no social elevation. A strictly professional relationship. Phoebe looked around her rooms, earned through her own courage and capability. She had a contract, a generous salary, and authority over an entire household. For the first time in her life, she was more than a pair of hands to be used. She was valued, trusted. It should have been enough. She pulled the curtains closed, shutting out the distant light, and told herself again that it was. Phoebe began her campaign to save Heathmore at dawn the next morning. She started with the accounts, requesting them from Brennan immediately after breakfast. The old butler had delivered 3 years' worth of ledgers with an expression that suggested he expected her to be overwhelmed. Instead, Phoebe had spent the entire day cross-referencing expenditures against inventory, identifying waste and inconsistency with the methodical precision of someone who had learned to stretch every farthing. By evening, she had a list of 17 areas requiring immediate attention and a preliminary budget for repairs. The staff had watched her initial efforts with barely concealed skepticism. A woman barely past her 23rd year, common-born, elevated beyond her station by the Duke's inexplicable whim. They expected her to fail, expected her to prove herself incapable of managing an estate this size, this complex. Phoebe had encountered such doubt before. She answered it the only way she knew how, with relentless, undeniable competence. Within a week, she had established new schedules for every member of the household. The maids now worked in coordinated rotations, tackling one room at a time with thorough attention rather than the previous method of cursory daily sweeps. The footmen were assigned regular maintenance tasks, repairs to window frames, replacement of worn cords on the draperies, polishing of neglected silver. Even the cook found herself consulted on kitchen improvements and given a modest budget increase for better quality provisions. Phoebe was fair but exacting. She praised good work and corrected failures with firm, quiet instruction. She worked alongside the staff when necessary, demonstrating that no task was beneath her. When one of the maids fell ill, Phoebe spent an afternoon scrubbing floors herself, her hands raw by evening, but the work completed to her standards. Slowly, grudgingly, respect began to replace skepticism. The Duke observed all of this from a distance that seemed to be his natural state. He appeared at breakfast occasionally, always punctual, always courteous, and always gone within 20 minutes. He took his other meals in the library, or when weather permitted, didn't return to the house until well after dark. He rode the estate daily, checking on tenants and inspecting lands. A solitary figure against the vast moorland. When their paths crossed, which they did with increasing frequency as Phoebe expanded her inspection of the house, he acknowledged her with a nod or a brief inquiry about her progress. She responded with equally brief reports. Their interactions were models of professional efficiency, exactly as specified in the contract. And yet Phoebe found herself increasingly aware of his presence, even when he wasn't visible. She learned his patterns, the early morning rides, the hours spent in the library between 2 and 5 each afternoon, the occasional late-night walks through the garden. She learned that he preferred his tea without sugar, that he detested waste of any kind, and that he noticed everything despite his apparent detachment. She also learned that he was watching her. Not obviously. The Duke was far too controlled for obvious observation. but she would catch glimpses of him pausing in doorways when she was directing the footman, or standing at library windows that overlooked the garden where she sometimes took her afternoon break with Ghost. He never interrupted, never interfered with her authority. He simply watched, his expression unreadable. It was unnerving. And, if Phoebe was honest with herself, oddly thrilling. The shift came 2 weeks after her arrival, on an afternoon when autumn rain drummed against the windows and made outdoor work impossible. Phoebe had been in the small parlor that she had claimed as a temporary office, reviewing supplier contracts, when Ghost had begun limping noticeably on his injured paw. The puppy had been healing well under her care, proper food and warmth working small miracles, but the paw remained tender. Phoebe had meant to take him to the village to see if there was anyone with veterinary knowledge, but the roads had been treacherous with mud. She had settled Ghost on her lap and carefully unwrapped the clean cloth she kept bound around his paw. The injury was better than it had been, but still inflamed. As she examined it, murmuring soft reassurances to the trembling puppy, she didn't notice the Duke's arrival until his shadow fell across her desk. Phoebe looked up, startled. Gideon stood in the doorway, rain damp from a ride, his dark hair disordered. He should have looked diminished by the weather. Instead, he seemed more real, more present than she had yet seen him. "The accounts are in order?" he asked, his gaze dropping to the papers spread across her desk. "Yes, Your Grace. I was about to prepare this week's summary for your review." "Good." He paused, then nodded toward Ghost. "The animal's paw isn't healing?" "It's improving, but slowly. I plan to take him to the village when the road's clear." "That won't be necessary." Gideon moved into the room with that predatory grace she had noticed at the ball. "I have some experience with animal injuries. May I?" Phoebe hesitated, then shifted Ghost so the Duke could see the paw more clearly. Gideon crouched beside her chair, bringing his eyes level with hers. At this proximity, she could see details she had missed before: the faint scar along his jawline, the surprising length of his dark lashes, the precise way he held himself even in this informal position. His hands, when he took Ghost's paw, were surprisingly gentle. Long fingers probed the injury with careful expertise while the puppy watched him with cautious trust. "A stone bruise, I think, complicated by infection from the initial injury," Gideon said. His voice had lost its formal edge, becoming something more natural. "There's a salve we use for the horses that would help. And the binding should be looser. You're restricting blood flow." "I didn't realize." Phoebe felt a flush of embarrassment. "I've never cared for an animal before. Yet you risked everything to save one." He looked up at her, and something in his expression had shifted. The ice had thinned, revealing something warmer beneath. "That was foolish, Miss Hartley." "Yes, Your Grace." "And remarkably brave." The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Phoebe's breath caught. This close, she could see the complexity in his gray eyes, not cold at all, she realized, but carefully banked, like embers hidden beneath ash, waiting for oxygen. Ghost chose that moment to lick the Duke's hand, his small pink tongue rasping against skin. The gesture was so trusting, so innocent, that something crossed Gideon's face, a flicker of surprised pleasure quickly suppressed. But not quickly enough. He had felt something. The armor had cracked just for an instant, and Phoebe had seen the man beneath the Duke. Gideon stood abruptly, putting distance between them. "I'll have Brennan bring the salve. Apply it twice daily and rebind the paw loosely. He should be running within a week." "Thank you, Your Grace." He nodded once, already retreating toward the door. But he paused at the threshold, his back to her. "You've done excellent work with the household, Miss Hartley. The improvements are notable." Then he was gone, his footsteps fading down the corridor. Phoebe sat very still, ghost warm in her lap, her heart beating faster than it should. She told herself it meant nothing, a moment of kindness toward an injured animal, professional acknowledgement of competent work. But her fingers trembled slightly as she gathered the scattered papers, and when she looked out the window toward the distant moors, she wondered what other cracks might exist in the Duke's carefully constructed walls. The library had become Phoebe's unexpected sanctuary. It had started practically enough. The household accounts needed space to spread properly, and her small parlor office had proven insufficient for the estate maps and tenant records she needed to cross-reference. Brennan had suggested the library's large work table, assuring her that His Grace rarely used it, preferring the desk by the window. Phoebe had arrived that first evening with her arms full of ledgers, half expecting to find the room empty. Instead, the Duke had been at his customary desk, reading by lamplight. He had glanced up at her entrance, taken in her burden of papers, and simply nodded toward the work table before returning to his book. No invitation, but no dismissal either. She had worked in silence for 2 hours, acutely aware of his presence 20 feet away. The only sounds had been the crackling fire, the scratch of her pen, and the occasional turn of a page from his direction. When she finally gathered her materials to leave, he had bid her a courteous good night without looking up. The next evening, she had returned. And the next. Until it became an unspoken routine, Phoebe at the work table with her accounts and correspondence, Gideon at his desk with his books and papers, the silence between them strangely companionable. Ghost had complicated matters in the best possible way. The puppy's paw had healed rapidly under the Duke's prescribed treatment, and now he divided his time between Phoebe's rooms and wherever she happened to be working. In the library, he would settle on the hearth rug, equidistant between his 2 favorite humans, occasionally padding over to one or the other for attention. It was Ghost who had prompted their first real conversation. Phoebe had been reviewing the tenant records, frowning over an entry that showed the Millworth farm 3 months behind on rent. The Duke, she had learned through careful observation, was not a harsh landlord. He charged fair rates and made improvements to tenant properties without increasing costs. But 3 months suggested genuine hardship, and the notes offered no explanation. "Your Grace," she had said, breaking an hour's silence, "may I ask about the Millworth situation?" Gideon had looked up from his book, his reading glasses catching the lamplight. She had not known he wore glasses. The discovery had felt oddly intimate. "What about it?" "They're significantly behind on rent, but there's no notation about eviction proceedings or payment plans. I wanted to understand your preference before I addressed it." He had removed the glasses, folding them with precise care. James Millworth's wife died in childbirth last spring. He has 4 children under the age of 10 and is managing the farm alone. I've granted him a temporary reduction in rent until he can hire help. "I see. Should I note that formally in the records?" "Please." He had paused, studying her. "You disapprove?" "Not at all, Your Grace. I think it's remarkably compassionate. I simply want to ensure I'm managing the accounts in alignment with your policies." Something had shifted in his expression, surprise perhaps, that she had called him compassionate rather than soft or financially imprudent. "The estate's purpose is not merely to generate income, Miss Hartley. The tenants are people, not resources to be extracted. Their welfare is part of my responsibility." Then perhaps, Phoebe had said carefully, we should review all the tenant situations together. I've noticed several that might benefit from similar consideration, but I lack the context you possess. That had been the beginning. Now, 3 weeks into her tenure at Heathmore, their evenings had developed a new rhythm. They still worked in companionable silence, but increasingly that silence was broken by consultation. Gideon would ask her opinion on a tenant's request for building materials. She would inquire about the history of a particular farm or family. He possessed intimate knowledge of the land and its people. She brought fresh perspective and practical problem-solving. They made, Phoebe had to admit, an effective team. Tonight, rain hammered against the library windows while wind howled across the moors. Phoebe had finished her immediate work and found herself simply sitting, watching the fire. Ghost's head heavy on her foot, she should have returned to her rooms. The hour was late, and propriety suggested she not linger in the Duke's private space. But the library was warm, and her rooms felt lonely in comparison. "You're thinking loudly," Gideon said, without looking up from his book. Phoebe startled. "I beg your pardon?" "You have an expression when you're puzzling through something. Your left eyebrow draws down slightly, and you tap your thumb against whatever you're holding." He turned a page. "Currently, your teacup, which is empty." She looked down at the cup in her hands, at her thumb tapping an unconscious rhythm against the porcelain. Heat crept up her neck. He had been observing her that closely? "I was thinking about the East Wing," she said, deciding honesty was safer than deflection. "Mr. Brennan mentioned it's been closed for 15 years. I was calculating what it might cost to restore it versus the ongoing expense of heating and maintaining the rooms we're using." "And your conclusion?" "That I don't have enough information. I'd need to inspect the wing to assess the damage, but Mr. Brennan seemed reluctant to provide access." Gideon set his book aside, giving her his full attention. In the firelight, his features were softer than usual, the harsh lines of his face gentled by shadow. "The East Wing contains my parents' rooms and my childhood quarters. Brennan is protective of those spaces. He served my father with great devotion." "I didn't mean to intrude on private grief, Your Grace." "It's been 15 years, Miss Hartley. Hardly fresh grief." His voice was dry, but something beneath it suggested the calculation wasn't quite so simple. "However, your practical point is valid. We're heating 17 rooms to maintain a household of 9 people. It's inefficient. But not everything is about efficiency." He tilted his head, studying her. "You surprise me. I would have thought you, of all people, would prioritize practicality." "Practicality has its place. But so does sentiment. If those rooms hold meaning for you or for Brennan, the cost of maintaining them might be worthwhile regardless of efficiency." Gideon rose from his desk and moved to the fire, standing close enough that she could see the play of light and shadow across his face. Ghost immediately went to him, tail wagging, and the Duke bent to scratch the puppy's ears with absent affection. "You're very perceptive," he said quietly. "It's an uncomfortable quality in an employee. Would you prefer me to be less observant?" "I'm not sure what I prefer." He straightened, his gaze meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You've been here nearly a month, Miss Hartley. You've transformed the household, earned the staff's loyalty, and proven yourself far more capable than I had any right to expect. You've also developed the disconcerting habit of reading me better than most people who've known me for years." "Is that a criticism, Your Grace?" "It's an observation." His lips quirked in what might have been the ghost of a smile. "You're permitted observations as well." It was an opening, slight but definite. Phoebe chose her words carefully. Then I observe that you've created a life of deliberate isolation, Your Grace. But isolation and peace are not the same thing. And I wonder if you found what you were looking for in all this solitude. The words hung between them, far too bold for a housekeeper to speak to a duke. Phoebe half expected him to remind her of her place, to retreat behind the ice wall he maintained so carefully. Instead, Gideon held her gaze for a long moment, something unreadable moving behind his gray eyes. "No," he said finally. "I haven't." Then he bid her good night and left the library, leaving Phoebe alone with Ghost and the flickering fire and the stunning realization that the Duke's armor had cracked wider than she'd thought. And she had no idea what to do about it. The arrival of the Dowager Duchess of Shaw was announced 3 days in advance by an express letter that sent Brennan into a state of barely suppressed panic. Phoebe watched the old butler transform from his usual steady competence into something approaching agitation, barking orders at the staff and personally inspecting rooms that had been cleaned to perfection weeks ago. "Her Grace is exacting," he explained when Phoebe inquired about the unusual intensity. "And she has very particular opinions about how things should be managed." This proved to be a spectacular understatement. The Dowager arrived on a gray afternoon in a carriage that looked expensive enough to purchase a small estate. She was a tall woman in her 60s, handsome rather than beautiful, with the same gray eyes as her nephew and a bearing that suggested she had never questioned her own authority in her entire life. Her traveling costume was severely elegant, her silver hair arranged with architectural precision beneath a hat that probably cost more than Phoebe's annual salary. Gideon met her in the entrance hall with what appeared to be genuine warmth, the first real emotion Phoebe had seen him display toward another person. He embraced his aunt, actually smiled, and engaged in several minutes of conversation about her journey that revealed an ease entirely absent from his other interactions. Phoebe observed from the shadows of the corridor, Ghost tucked under her arm, professional invisibility firmly in place. The Dowager's sharp gaze found her anyway. "And who," she said, her voice carrying effortlessly across the hall, "is this?" "My housekeeper," Gideon said smoothly. "Miss Phoebe Hartley. She's been transforming Heathmore's operations with remarkable efficiency." "Has she indeed?" The Dowager approached with the measured pace of someone conducting an inspection. Up close, her eyes were even more penetrating than her nephew's, missing nothing as they catalogued Phoebe's plain dress, work-roughened hands, and the puppy in her arms. "How enterprising of you, Gideon. When did you develop an interest in household management?" "When I discovered someone capable of actually managing it." Gideon's tone remained pleasant, but Phoebe detected steel beneath the courtesy. "Miss Hartley has proven invaluable." "I'm sure she has." The Dowager's gaze returned to Phoebe. "Tell me, Miss Hartley, what precisely are your qualifications for such a significant position? You seem rather young for a role of this scope." It was a test, obviously. Phoebe met the older woman's eyes steadily. "I served 3 years in the household of the Countess Montrose, Your Grace, where I learned the operations of a substantial London residence. I have a facility with accounts and organization, and I believe strongly that good management requires both competence and fairness." "The Countess Montrose." The Dowager's eyebrow rose fractionally. "I know Henrietta. She wouldn't part with a competent servant willingly. How did you come to leave her employ?" The question was a trap, elegantly baited. Any answer would either impugn the Countess or reveal Phoebe's own disgrace. "I intervened in a situation involving animal cruelty at one of her ladyship's events," Phoebe said carefully. "The Countess felt my actions reflected poorly on her household. His Grace was kind enough to see the matter differently and offer me a position here. How romantic, the dowager said dryly. A rescue. How unlike you, Gideon. I thought you had forsworn such theatrical gestures. I offered employment, Aunt Catherine, not a proposal of marriage. Miss Hartley's capabilities speak for themselves. The household accounts are available if you'd like to review them. Oh, I shall. Along with a great many other things. The dowager swept past them toward the drawing room, clearly expecting to be followed. Have tea sent in, Miss Hartley, and do join us. I find I have questions about Heathmore's management that you're uniquely positioned to answer. It was a command, not an invitation. Gideon caught Phoebe's eye and gave a small, almost imperceptible shrug that might have been apology or warning. Then he followed his aunt, leaving Phoebe to arrange the tea and prepare for what promised to be an extraordinarily uncomfortable interrogation. The tea service became an inquisition conducted with surgical precision and impeccable manners. The dowager asked pointed questions about Phoebe's background, her education, her family, her aspirations. Each inquiry was phrased politely, but designed to expose limitations and presumptions. Where had she learned accounting? From the Countess's steward, who had appreciated her quick mind. What books had she read? Whatever she could borrow or afford, which wasn't many, did she understand the social implications of her position in the Duke's household? That last question landed like a blade. Phoebe set down her teacup with careful precision. I understand perfectly, Your Grace. I am an employee, nothing more. His Grace has been entirely proper, and I have never presumed beyond my station. Haven't you? The dowager's gaze was sharp. You dine in his library most evenings. You consult with him on estate matters, traditionally handled by a steward. You carry that ridiculous puppy everywhere, like a lady's lapdog. The lines, my dear, have become remarkably blurred. Aunt Catherine. Gideon's voice carried a warning. That's enough. Is it? I arrived to find you rusticating in this crumbling pile with a beautiful young woman of questionable background and no chaperone. What precisely am I meant to think? You're meant to think that I hired a competent housekeeper who has proven her worth a dozen times over. Gideon's composure remained intact, but Phoebe could see tension in his shoulders. My relationship with Miss Hartley is entirely professional, as she stated. Your implication otherwise is insulting to us both. The dowager studied her nephew for a long moment, then sighed. Very well. I apologize, Miss Hartley. That was unworthy of me. She paused. Though not entirely unjustified. Gideon has spent the better part of a decade avoiding any situation that might lead to emotional entanglement. Finding him in close quarters with an attractive, capable young woman is unusual. There is no entanglement, Gideon said flatly. Emotional or otherwise. Something flickered in the dowager's expression, sympathy perhaps, or sadness. She set down her teacup and looked at Phoebe directly. My dear, would you excuse us for a moment? There are family matters I need to discuss with my nephew. It was a dismissal, gentle but absolute. Phoebe rose, ghost in her arms, and curtsied. Of course, Your Grace. She had reached the door when the dowager spoke again. Miss Hartley, you truly see this as merely employment? Nothing more? Phoebe turned back, meeting the older woman's knowing gaze. Lying seemed pointless. I see it as what it is, Your Grace. Nothing more than that is possible. Possible and advisable are different things, child. Remember that. Phoebe fled to her rooms, her heart hammering. She tried to focus on correspondence, on account books, on anything that might distract from the afternoon's disaster. But her mind kept returning to the dowager's questions. to the implications and warnings. An hour later, a knock came at her door. She opened it to find not a maid, but the dowager herself, alone and somehow less formidable without an audience. "May I come in?" Phoebe stepped aside, too shocked to do otherwise. The dowager entered and settled into the chair by the window with the ease of someone accustomed to being welcome everywhere. "I owe you a more complete apology," she said without preamble. "And an explanation. Gideon is dear to me. He's the closest thing I have to a son. And I've watched him lock himself away in this place, convincing himself that isolation equals safety. Your Grace, I don't think... Please, let me finish." The dowager's expression softened. When Gideon was 17, he fell desperately in love with a young woman. Charlotte Pemberton, beautiful, charming, and utterly mercenary. She encouraged his devotion, accepted his very public proposal, and 3 days before the wedding, eloped with a wealthy merchant's son. The scandal was devastating. But worse was the letter she left, explaining that she had never loved him, that she'd merely been keeping him as a backup while pursuing better options. Phoebe sank into the opposite chair, her throat tight. That's horrible. It taught him that emotional vulnerability leads to humiliation, that love is a weakness to be exploited. He's spent 15 years proving he doesn't need anyone, that he's perfectly content in his self-imposed exile. The dowager leaned forward. "But you've unsettled that careful construction, Miss Hartley. I saw it in how he defended you, in how he watches you when you're not looking. And that terrifies me, because if you hurt him..." "I would never," Phoebe interrupted. "Your Grace, I have no designs on the Duke. I know my place." "That's precisely the problem, child. You know your place, and he knows his, and neither of you will risk crossing that line. So you'll circle each other in increasing misery until one of you has the courage to acknowledge what's actually happening." The dowager rose. "I don't know if you're brave enough for that, but I hope you are. Because my nephew deserves more than the half-life he's built here. And I suspect you do too." She left Phoebe alone with Ghost and the weight of understanding she could no longer deny. If you're feeling the emotion of this story right now, if your heart ached when you learned about Gideon's past, then imagine how it feels to pour hours into creating this for you, only to see you leave without even tapping the subscribe button. That subscribe button tells me you care, that this story matters to you. Thousands are watching, but only a handful take 1 second to show appreciation. Don't let this story's beauty go unacknowledged. Hit that subscribe button right now. It costs you nothing, but means everything to me, who works tirelessly to move your heart. The letter arrived on a crystalline morning when frost painted the moors silver and Phoebe's breath misted in the cold library air. She was reviewing the quarterly accounts, Ghost sprawled across her feet in his favorite position, when Brennan entered with the post on a silver tray. "For His Grace," the butler said, his tone suggesting something unpleasant. "From Lady Clarissa Baines. She announces her intention to visit Heathmore. She'll arrive tomorrow." Phoebe's pen stilled against the ledger. Through the window, she could see Gideon riding across the estate, a dark figure against the pale landscape. He had been gone since dawn, inspecting the northern farms, and wouldn't return until afternoon. Tomorrow? She looked up at Brennan. That's rather short notice for a guest of her status. Lady Clarissa has never been overly concerned with convenience, Brennan said dryly. Shall I inform His Grace upon his return? Please. Phoebe returned her attention to the accounts, but the numbers blurred before her eyes. She remembered Lady Clarissa from the Countess's ball, the emerald silk, the sharp beauty, the mockery that had cut like glass. The woman who had led the ridicule while Phoebe stood covered in mud and shame. And now, she was coming here. Gideon's reaction that evening was even more telling than Phoebe had feared. He read the letter once, his expression darkening, then set it aside with barely controlled irritation. "She has no business inviting herself to Heathmore," he said. "We're barely acquainted, and I've given her no encouragement whatsoever." "She's a lady of quality seeking hospitality," Phoebe offered carefully. "You can hardly refuse without causing offense." "I could. I have before." He paced to the library window, staring out at the gathering dusk. "Lady Clarissa has been pursuing a proposal for 2 seasons. She views my disinterest as a challenge to be overcome through persistence and strategy. Perhaps she's simply paying a social call." "Phoebe." He turned, using her Christian name for the first time, the intimacy of it stopping her breath. "She was at the Countess's ball. She led the mockery against you. Her arrival now, after weeks of silence, is not coincidence. It's calculation." The use of her name hung between them, impossible to ignore. Phoebe stood, needing distance, needing to think. "Then we'll manage it professionally, Your Grace. She's a guest. I'm your housekeeper. The situation is perfectly clear." Something flashed in his eyes, frustration, perhaps, or resignation. Yes, perfectly clear. But it didn't feel clear when Lady Clarissa's carriage rolled up the drive the next afternoon. It felt like an invasion. Clarissa descended in a flurry of expensive fabrics and practiced grace, her beauty undimmed by travel. She was accompanied by her maid and enough luggage to suggest an extended stay, despite claiming she would only impose for a few days. Gideon received her in the entrance hall with rigid courtesy while Phoebe observed from her usual position of professional invisibility near the corridor. "Your Grace," Clarissa said, her voice warm with manufactured delight. "How wonderful to finally see Heathmore. I've heard so much about your estate. It's quite rustic." The pause before the last word was deliberate, an insult wrapped in observation. "We prefer the term pastoral," Gideon replied coolly. "Brennan will show you to your rooms. Dinner is at 7. Clarissa's gaze swept the entrance hall, cataloging details, until it landed on Phoebe. Recognition sparked in her blue eyes, followed by something that looked like triumph. "Good heavens. Miss Hartley, isn't it? The maid from the Countess's ball?" She pressed a hand to her chest in exaggerated surprise. "What an extraordinary coincidence. Though I suppose you found new employment after that unfortunate incident with the mongrel." "Miss Hartley is my head housekeeper," Gideon said, his voice dropping to a temperature that could freeze water. "And she manages my household with exceptional skill." "How remarkably progressive of you, Your Grace." Clarissa's smile was razor-sharp. "Elevating servants beyond their natural station. Though I suppose here in the country, standards are more flexible." Phoebe felt heat crawl up her neck, but kept her expression neutral. "Welcome to Heathmore, Lady Clarissa. If you require anything during your stay, please don't hesitate to inform the staff." She escaped to the kitchens, where the cook was already preparing an elaborate dinner under Phoebe's earlier direction. But she could feel the danger that had just entered her carefully constructed sanctuary. Lady Clarissa hadn't come for a social visit. She'd come for blood. The assault began in earnest the following morning. Phoebe was conferring with one of the maids about linens when she overheard Clarissa in the morning room, speaking to Sarah, the youngest housemaid, in a voice pitched to Carrie. "I simply cannot fathom His Grace's thinking," Clarissa said with false sympathy. "Hiring someone with no proper references, no family connections, no training in estate management." One wonders what qualifications she actually possessed. The implication was crystal clear. Sarah's face flushed crimson. "Miss Hartley is very capable, my lady," the girl said quietly. "She's been good to all of us." "I'm sure she's been very good at cultivating loyalty." Clarissa's laugh was light and poisonous. "Tell me, does she often spend her evenings in His Grace's library, alone? I've heard the most curious rumors about their working relationship." Phoebe stepped into the doorway, her spine straight. "Lady Clarissa, I trust your accommodations are satisfactory?" Clarissa turned with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Quite satisfactory, Miss Hartley. I was just remarking on what a fascinating household you've created. So informal, so modern. The Duke prefers efficiency over ceremony. How convenient for you." Clarissa rose, moving closer with predatory grace. "You know, I remember you quite clearly from the Countess's ball. Covered in mud, clutching that pathetic creature, looking absolutely desperate. And now here you are, mistress of a ducal estate. What a remarkable transformation. One might even call it suspicious." "One might call it employment," Phoebe said evenly. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have duties to attend." She left before Clarissa could respond, but her hands shook as she walked away. This was only the beginning. She could feel it. By afternoon, Clarissa had interviewed half the staff under the guise of friendly conversation, asking pointed questions about Phoebe's background, her relationship with the Duke, the propriety of their evening meetings. She expressed shocked, that a woman of such humble origins should have authority over an estate of Heathmore's importance. She wondered aloud about Phoebe's true qualifications, her real motivations, the nature of her hold over the Duke. The staff, to their credit, remained loyal. But Phoebe could see the seeds of doubt being planted. Even Brennan seemed troubled when he came to her office that evening. "Lady Clarissa has been asking questions," he said carefully, "about your past, your family. She seems particularly interested in the circumstances of your dismissal from the Countess's household." "And what have you told her?" "The truth. That you were hired by His Grace and have proven yourself exceptional." He paused. "But Miss Hartley, she's intent on discovering something scandalous. If there are details from your past that might be used against you..." "There's nothing to discover, Mr. Brennan. I was born poor. I worked as a maid. I was dismissed for intervening on behalf of an abused animal. Those are facts, not scandals. In Lady Clarissa's hands, facts become weapons." He was right. That evening, during dinner, Clarissa launched her most direct assault yet. "Your Grace," she said, her voice dripping sympathy as she addressed Gideon across the table, "I feel I must speak plainly, as a friend concerned for your welfare. I've made some inquiries about Miss Hartley's background." Gideon set down his wine glass with deliberate care. "Have you?" "Her family were laborers. Her father died in debtor's prison. She has no education beyond basic literacy, no training in household management, no references from her previous employer. And yet, you've given her extraordinary authority over your estate and your household." Clarissa leaned forward. "I know you value privacy, but surely you can see how this appears. A beautiful young woman of desperate circumstances, elevated far beyond her station, spending unchaperoned evenings in your company. People will talk. They already are. Let them talk. But your Grace..." "Lady Clarissa," Gideon's voice could have cut diamond. "Miss Hartley's background is her own business. Her qualifications are evident in the exceptional management of my household. and my relationship with her is none of your concern." Clarissa's composure cracked slightly. "I'm only trying to protect you from a woman who is clearly taking advantage. You're trying to manipulate me into dismissing someone who has proven herself invaluable. It won't work." He stood. "I believe you mentioned departing tomorrow. I'll have the carriage prepared at first light." The dismissal was absolute. Clarissa's face went white, then red. "You're choosing her over me? A nobody? A servant?" "I'm choosing competence and integrity over malice and manipulation." Gideon's gaze was ice. "Good night, Lady Clarissa." He left the dining room without another word. Clarissa turned her fury on Phoebe. "This isn't over," she hissed. "I will ruin you. I will ensure every household in England knows what you are, a scheming opportunist who seduced her way into a position she has no right to hold." Phoebe met her gaze steadily. "I've done nothing but my work, Lady Clarissa. If that threatens you, perhaps you should examine why." She left Clarissa sputtering with rage, her heart hammering but her head high. Tomorrow the woman would be gone. But her poison would linger, and Phoebe knew the price of tonight's victory was yet to be calculated. Lady Clarissa did not leave at first light as commanded. Instead, she appeared at breakfast with a brittle smile and announced she had sent an urgent letter to several of her dearest friends in the county, inviting them to tea that very afternoon at Heathmore. To refuse would be unconscionably rude, she explained with saccharine sweetness. Surely the Duke wouldn't object to a small gathering? Gideon's expression could have frozen hellfire, but years of aristocratic training held. "You presume too much, Lady Clarissa." "I presume friendship, Your Grace, and concern. Surely you want your neighbors to see how well Heathmore is being managed under such unusual circumstances." It was a trap elegantly sprung. Refuse, and he appeared to be hiding something shameful. Accept, and Clarissa would have an audience for whatever destruction she had planned. Phoebe, standing in the doorway with the morning's post, saw the calculation in Gideon's eyes. He was weighing options, searching for an escape that wouldn't create a larger scandal. "Of course, Lady Clarissa," Phoebe said smoothly, drawing both their attention. "We'd be delighted to host your friends. I'll have tea prepared for 2:30 in the drawing room. Will 6 guests be sufficient, or should I prepare for more?" Clarissa's smile sharpened. 6 will be perfect. How efficiently you manage things, Miss Hartley. One would almost think you were born to it." "One would be mistaken," Phoebe replied evenly. "I was born to work, Lady Clarissa. I simply learned to do it well." She left before the conversation could escalate, her mind already racing through preparations. 6 county ladies arriving for tea meant gossip would spread like wildfire through the entire region. Whatever happened this afternoon would define her position at Heathmore, and quite possibly destroy it. The staff sensed the coming storm. As Phoebe moved through the house organizing preparations, she found them watching her with expressions ranging from concern to fierce loyalty. It was Sarah who spoke first, cornering Phoebe in the linen closet. "We know what she's doing, miss," the young maid said, her hands twisting in her apron. "Lady Clarissa's been talking to everyone, trying to make you seem improper. But we won't let her. We won't." "Sarah, I appreciate your loyalty, but you must be careful. Speaking against a lady of her status is exactly what you did for that puppy," interrupted Mrs. Dawes, the cook, appearing in the doorway with her substantial frame blocking escape. "You risked everything for what was right. You think we don't see that? You think we don't know what kind of housekeeper you are compared to what we've had before? She treats us like people," Sarah added passionately. "Not furniture, not servants. People. Brennan materialized behind the cook, his aged face set with determination. Miss Hartley, I have served this family for 43 years. I have seen 3 housekeepers manage Heathmore. You are the finest of them all, and I will say so to anyone who asks, including Lady Clarissa's guests. Phoebe felt her throat tighten dangerously. Mr. Brennan, you could lose your position. I'm 71 years old, miss. What exactly do I have to fear? His eyes softened. You gave me back my purpose when you arrived. Let me return the favor. By afternoon, the drawing room gleamed with fresh polish and careful arrangement. The silver tea service, which Phoebe had discovered tarnished in a cupboard and spent a week restoring, reflected the pale winter sunlight. Fresh flowers from the greenhouse, coaxed into bloom through careful tending, adorned the tables. Every detail was perfect, a testament to the household's capabilities under Phoebe's management. The guests arrived precisely at 2:30. 6 county ladies of varying ages, all wealthy, all influential, all clearly curious about the scandalous situation they'd been promised. Clarissa greeted them with the air of a hostess in her own home, making introductions and settling everyone before Phoebe could even enter the room. And this, Clarissa announced as Phoebe appeared with the first tray, is Miss Hartley, the Duke's housekeeper. The pause was deliberate, loaded with insinuation. The lady's eyes tracked Phoebe with the avid interest of spectators at a public execution. Good afternoon, Phoebe said calmly, setting down the tea service. Welcome to Heathmore. I hope you'll find everything satisfactory. I'm sure we will, said Lady Morton, a formidable woman in her 60s. Lady Clarissa has been telling us the most fascinating story about your appointment. Quite irregular, from what we understand. His Grace hired me based on competence rather than connections, Phoebe replied. I consider that a credit to his judgment, not an irregularity. But surely you must admit, another lady interjected, that a woman of your background managing an estate of this magnitude is highly unusual. One wonders how you acquired such specialized knowledge. Through work, Lady Pemberton. Years of it. Clarissa leaned forward, her voice honey-sweet and venomous. Ladies, I think we should be direct. We're all women of the world. We understand how attractive young women sometimes use their natural advantages to secure positions beyond their qualifications. I'm sure Miss Hartley is very grateful to His Grace for his extraordinary generosity. Aren't you, my dear? The implication hung in the air like poison gas. The ladies exchanged knowing glances, scandal confirmed in their minds. Phoebe felt her cheeks burn, but held Clarissa's gaze steadily. I'm grateful for employment that allows me to use my abilities fully, she said. If that's what you're asking. Oh, I think we all know what abilities. That's quite enough, Lady Clarissa. Every head turned to find Gideon standing in the doorway, his presence filling the room with sudden tension. He was dressed formally, his expression carved from granite, but his eyes blazed with controlled fury. Your Grace, Clarissa rose smoothly. We were just having a friendly conversation. You were publicly maligning my housekeeper with thinly veiled accusations. Gideon moved into the room, and the ladies unconsciously leaned back in their chairs. I won't tolerate it. Brennan appeared behind the Duke, his aged voice carrying with surprising strength. If I may interject, Your Grace, these ladies have been misinformed about Miss Hartley's qualifications and character. I would like to set the record straight. Please do, Brennan. The old butler straightened to his full height. I have served the Shaw family since before His Grace was born. I have known privilege and poverty, competence and incompetence. Miss Hartley is the most capable manager this household has seen in my lifetime. She has restored order, improved efficiency, and treated every member of this staff with dignity and fairness. If anyone questions her character or her position, they question my judgment and my honor. Mrs. Dawes had materialized in the doorway, still wearing her apron. And mine, Your Grace. That girl works harder than 3 people. She's earned every penny of her salary and every bit of respect she's given. Sarah appeared next to the cook, trembling but determined. She's kind, Your Grace. She's fair. And she saved a puppy, even though she knew it would cost her everything. That's the kind of person Miss Hartley is. One by one, the entire household staff gathered in the drawing room and corridor. Footmen, maids, even the stable boy, standing in silent solidarity behind their housekeeper. It was unprecedented. Servants simply didn't involve themselves in aristocratic disputes. But there they stood, loyal and unwavering. Gideon looked at the assembled staff, then at Phoebe, something profound shifting in his expression. When he spoke, his voice carried absolute authority. Lady Clarissa, you came to Heathmore with the intention of destroying Miss Hartley's reputation and forcing me to dismiss her. You have failed spectacularly. He gestured to the gathered servants. These people who see her work every day, who benefit from her leadership, have spoken more eloquently than I could about her worth. But let me add this. Miss Hartley is not merely my employee. She is my partner in the management of this estate. She has my complete trust and my unwavering support. Partner? Clarissa's voice rose sharply. Your Grace, surely you cannot mean, I mean exactly what I said. Gideon's gaze swept the assembled county ladies. You may carry that message back to your friends and neighbors. Miss Hartley has my protection and my respect. Anyone who questions her character or her position questions my judgment. I trust I've made myself clear. The silence that followed was absolute. Lady Morton was the first to recover, rising with practiced grace. Perfectly clear, Your Grace. Thank you for your hospitality, Miss Hartley. The tea was excellent. She nodded to Phoebe with what might have been respect. I can see Heathmore is in very capable hands. The other ladies followed her lead, making polite exits with remarkable speed. Only Clarissa remained, her face white with fury and humiliation. You'll regret this, she hissed at Gideon, when society hears how you've degraded yourself. I have degraded nothing, Gideon interrupted coldly. I have recognized excellence where I found it. If society cannot understand that distinction, I care even less for its opinion than I previously did. Your carriage is waiting, Lady Clarissa. Don't let me detain you further. After she swept out in a fury of silk and wounded pride, Gideon turned to his assembled staff. Thank you, he said simply. All of you. You may return to your duties. They dispersed quietly, leaving Gideon and Phoebe alone in the drawing room. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Phoebe found her voice, rough with suppressed emotion. You called me your partner. I did. That was extraordinarily kind, but unnecessary. I'm your employee, Your Grace. You needn't elevate me beyond. I said what I meant, Phoebe. He moved closer, his gray eyes intense. You are my partner, in every way that matters, and it's time we both stopped pretending otherwise. The words hung between them in the drawing room, impossible to unhear. Phoebe felt her carefully constructed defenses crumbling, brick by brick, under the weight of Gideon's steady gaze. He had called her his partner. He had said they should stop pretending. But pretending was safe. Pretending protected them both. Your Grace, she said, her voice barely steady. You've been extraordinarily kind. Today, you defended me publicly, risked your reputation for mine. But we both know the cost of that choice. Lady Clarissa will spread her poison regardless, and now you'll be associated with scandal. Your aunt was right. The situation appears improper. I cannot allow you to sacrifice your standing for what, Phoebe? For an employee? His voice was low, dangerous. Is that truly what you think you are to me? It's what I must be. She stepped back, needing distance, needing air. Anything else is impossible. Why? The single word shattered her composure. Because you're a duke and I'm a maid. Because society has rules for good reason. Because I won't be another Charlotte Pemberton, another person who takes advantage of your... She stopped, but too late. The name had escaped. Gideon went very still. My aunt told you about Charlotte? She wanted me to understand why you keep yourself so carefully distant. And I do understand, Your Grace. You built walls to protect yourself from being hurt again. I won't be the person who proves those walls necessary. You already are, he said quietly. Don't you see? You've been dismantling those walls since the moment you stood in that ballroom covered in mud, protecting a terrified puppy. You destroyed them completely when you looked at me as though I were simply a man rather than a title to be pursued. Phoebe shook her head, tears threatening. I can't be what you need. I have nothing to offer you, no family, no connections, no fortune. I would only drag you down. You offer me everything I've been missing. He moved closer, his intensity almost overwhelming. But I'm too much of a coward to say it plainly. Too afraid that if I speak the truth, you'll laugh or worse, pity me. I could never. Then stay. Please, don't make the decision for both of us. But Phoebe could see the future with terrible clarity. The gossip would intensify. His peers would mock him for his inappropriate attachment to a servant. Eventually, he would come to resent her for the damage to his reputation, his standing. Better to leave now, while she could still walk away with her heart merely cracked rather than shattered. I'm sorry, Your Grace, but I think it's best if I seek another position. She left before he could respond, before her resolve could crumble entirely. The packing took less than an hour. Everything she owned still fit into a single canvas bag, though now she had more than one dress and her savings had grown substantially. She had references from Gideon. He had written them weeks ago at her request, never questioning why she might need them. She had skills, experience, and the knowledge that she had managed a ducal estate successfully. She would be fine. She would find another position, somewhere far from Derbyshire. Somewhere she could forget gray eyes and quiet evenings in the library. Ghost watched her from the bed, his head tilted in confusion. He had grown from a scrawny, terrified puppy into a healthy young dog, his white coat gleaming, his injured paw completely healed. He was Gideon's as much as hers now, spending his days divided between them. You'll stay here, Phoebe told him, her voice breaking. He'll take care of you. He loves you. Ghost whined, unconvinced. She was folding her second dress when the door opened without preamble. Gideon stood in the doorway, still in his formal clothes from the confrontation, his hair disordered as though he'd been running his hands through it. What are you doing? Packing, Your Grace. I'll leave first thing in the morning. I've prepared notes for whoever you hire to replace me. The accounts are current, and I've documented all the ongoing projects. Stop! He crossed the room in 3 strides, grasping her shoulders and turning her to face him. Stop running. Stop deciding what's best for me. Stop being so bloody noble. I'm being practical. You're being terrified. We both are. His hands tightened, not painfully but desperately. Do you think I don't know what leaving costs you? You've built something here. You have respect, authority, security, everything you've ever wanted. And you're throwing it away because you think you're protecting me. I am protecting you. I don't want protection. The words came out raw, stripped of his usual control. I want you. I've wanted you since I saw you standing in that ballroom, defying everyone for a creature that couldn't defend itself. I've wanted you through every quiet evening in the library, every consultation about the tenants, every moment you made this mausoleum feel like a home rather than a prison. Phoebe stared at him, her heart hammering. You can't mean that. I mean every word. He released her shoulders but didn't step back. When Charlotte betrayed me, I decided emotions were weaknesses to be eliminated. I built a life of perfect isolation, convincing myself I was content. And then you arrived with a half-dead puppy and proceeded to dismantle everything I'd constructed. You made me feel again. You made me care. And it terrifies me. Your Grace, Gideon. His voice softened. For once, just call me Gideon. Gideon, she whispered, and something in his expression cracked open. This can't work. You know it can't. The difference between us is nothing that matters. He took her hands, his thumb tracing the rough calluses on her palms. I don't care about your birth or your past poverty. I care that you're brilliant and capable and kind. I care that you see people rather than ranks. I care that you risked everything for what was right, and you've done it more than once. Society will never accept. Society can go to hell. The vehemence in his voice startled her. I've spent 15 years living for society's approval, and it brought me nothing but loneliness. You brought me life. You and this ridiculous dog who's currently eating my favorite book. They both looked at Ghost, who had indeed seized a leather volume and was gnawing contentedly. Despite everything, Phoebe laughed, the sound wet with tears. See? Gideon said softly. You make me laugh. When was the last time I laughed before you arrived? This is madness. Then let's be mad together. He pulled her closer, his eyes searching hers. Phoebe Hartley, I am asking you, begging you, to stay. Not as my housekeeper, not as my employee, as my wife, as my partner in truth, not just in pretty words spoken to impress county ladies. The world seemed to tilt. You're asking me to marry you. I'm asking you to save me from the half-life I've been living. I'm asking you to let me love you, even though I'm terrible at it and will probably make a disaster of things. I'm asking you to be brave enough for both of us. Phoebe looked at him, really looked. At the fear beneath the hope in his eyes, the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands trembled slightly against hers. He was terrified. This man who faced down scandal and society with iron composure was terrified of her answer. Because he loved her. The Duke of Shaw, who had sworn off emotion and vulnerability, loved her. I'm a maid, she said, but her voice held wonder now rather than protest. I was mocked and dismissed and humiliated. I have nothing to bring to a marriage except myself. Yourself is everything. He raised her roughened hands to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. I don't want a society marriage built on contracts and convenience. I want a partnership built on respect and trust, and whatever this terrifying thing between us is. If you'll have me. If I haven't ruined it by being too much of a coward to speak sooner. Ghost abandoned the book and padded over, sitting on both their feet as though physically preventing separation. Phoebe looked down at the dog, then at the man who held her hands like they were precious rather than work-worn. She thought of the ballroom, the mockery, the moment his hand had extended toward hers. She thought of quiet evenings in the library, of shared work and mutual respect. She thought of the walls he'd built and the courage it took to dismantle them. "I'm terrified too," she whispered. "I know. Society will be vicious. I know. Your aunt will have strong opinions. She'll also dance at our wedding." A smile ghosted across his face. "She told me I was an idiot if I let you leave." Her exact words. She said something similar to me. Phoebe felt her own smile forming. "About having courage? Then be courageous with me." Gideon's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Say yes. Please." The word formed in her heart before it reached her lips. "Yes." For a moment, he simply stared as though he couldn't quite believe it. Then he pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe, his face buried in her hair. "Thank you," he said against her temple. "Thank you." Phoebe wrapped her arms around him, feeling the tension drain from his body as he held her. This man who never touched anyone, who maintained careful distance from the world, was clinging to her like she was oxygen itself. "I love you," she said, the words coming easier than she'd expected. "I've been trying not to, but I love you." He pulled back just enough to see her face, his gray eyes bright. "I love you. I'm not good at saying it. I'm not good at any of this. But I promise I'll try. We'll both try. Together." He kissed her then, tentative at first, then deeper as 15 years of loneliness met weeks of suppressed longing. It was unpracticed and perfect, a promise sealed without words. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Ghost barked approval and wagged his tail so enthusiastically his entire body shook. "I suppose we should tell the staff," Phoebe said shakily. "They already know." Gideon's smile was real now, transforming his austere features. "Brennan informed me that if I let you leave, he would resign in protest. The entire household is currently waiting downstairs to hear whether I convinced you to stay." "You're joking." "I never joke." But his eyes were warm. "They love you, Phoebe, almost as much as I do." She looked around her sparse rooms, the rooms she'd been packing to leave, and thought of the staff gathered below, of the estate she'd helped restore, of the man who'd taken her hand in a ballroom and changed her life. "I was a maid mocked for saving a puppy," she said softly. "And now you'll be a duchess loved for saving a duke." Gideon took her hand properly this time, their fingers interlacing. "If you'll have the title along with the man, I'll have both. Though I warn you, I'll probably be a terrible duchess. You'll be extraordinary." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "You already are." They descended the stairs together, hand in hand, Ghost bounding ahead. The staff waited in the entrance hall, trying and failing to look as though they hadn't been listening at doors. When they saw Phoebe and Gideon's joined hands, a cheer went up that probably violated every rule of proper servant behavior. Brennan stepped forward, his aged face creased with genuine joy. "Welcome home, Your Grace," he said to Phoebe. "Permanently this time." And standing there, surrounded by people who'd become family, held by a man who'd become her heart, Phoebe finally understood what home truly meant. You just experienced a complete love story, from humiliation to triumph, from loneliness to belonging. You felt every emotion, didn't you? Now here's the truth. Someone you know needs this story today. Someone in your life is feeling worthless, overlooked, or hopeless about love. And you're going to scroll past without sharing this with them? Really? This story could be exactly what changes their day, their perspective, their hope. Hit that share button. Tag someone who needs to remember that their worth isn't defined by others' cruelty. And if you've watched this far without subscribing, then you are breaking my heart. Subscribe now, because you'll want the next story, and the algorithm won't show it to you unless you do. Don't be that person who regrets missing out. At the end of this video, you'll see a suggestion for another powerful story from our channel. Click it and let yourself be surprised by even more unforgettable emotions with love. The Victorian Royal Stories team.